What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Stand Up and Laugh audiobook / podcast. My name is Angelo Gingerelli, stand-up comic and author of Stand Up and Laugh, available now from Microcosm Publishing. Just a quick introduction to the podcast. Is a little bit different than anything I've ever done before and different than a lot of other audiobooks and podcasts because it's not one or the other, it's actually both. So just a quick background. In early 2021, I published the zine Stand Up and Laugh on microcosmpublishing.com. And I decided to do an audiobook version of that, but I wanted to interview other comics and other people in the comedy world and kind of match those interviews up with the section of the book that kind of pertained to them. So it wasn't written with these interviews in mind. It was written from my experience as a stand-up comic at the Jersey Shore and being one of the first people to really get the ball rolling on that comedy scene. But once the zine came out, I kind of got the idea of, well, there's other comics that have experience with certain chapters or certain points or certain things that I wrote about in the book. So why not get another opinion, another point of view, because the book is only what I've experienced, so I thought it'd be valuable to get 10, 12 other comics to kind of sound off and share their experience with everybody, right? So I think it was a really good idea. So you'll hear as the podcast goes on, there's interviews with people like Chris Gethard, the Jerky Boys, the guys from the Crime and Sports podcast, pretty well-known men and women that have come out of kind of weird comedy scenes and not your New York, your LA, or Chicago traditional way. So I thought it was really valuable. So the way every episode is going to break down, it starts off with a brief introduction, similar to Here and Now. Then we're going to go to a about 7 to 10 minute reading of a section of the zine, followed immediately by an interview with a well-known comic that has experience with something we cover in that section of the zine. So a couple things to note before we get rolling on the first episode of the podcast. Number one, the book was written throughout 2019 and early 2020. The interviews were taken pretty much during spring and summer of 2021. So just kind of nothing's really dated. It's all kind of evergreen material that will help anybody at any point in their career. But just keep that in mind that everything is about 2021. So there are some mentions of the COVID-19 pandemic. I tried to edit a lot of that out because hopefully we're moving on from that and at least going back to normal, quote-unquote normal, whatever that means in the comedy world. And then the other thing is I've learned some things since 2021. Like I started a production company. I've released and recorded an album since then. So I've learned different things that are not in the book since then. Because everybody knows you want to be in this comedy game, you got to keep learning and getting better. Every night you get out, if you will. So you got to keep getting better all the time. So I have, but this is kind of a snapshot of what I learned between 2013 and right about 2019, developing and being a part of the developing comedy scene at the Jersey Shore. Other thing, the first episode we're going to listen to is an interview with Joe Biel and Elly Blue of Microcosmpublishing.com. It's the only episode that doesn't deal with specifically a comedy person, but I think it's important because they saw the vision in the book. They saw the value in creating a community through comedy and open mics and podcasts and stuff that we all know and love and love to be a part of. And they kind of signed off with the only publisher of the dozens I approached that wanted to turn this into a zine. So they're going to be the first episode, and after that we'll go rolling. People like Chris Gethard, the Jerky Boys, John Poveromo, people like that as the podcast gets rolling into episode 2 through 12. But the first one we're going to focus on the book writing side of things, the publishing industry, and why the good folks over at Microcosm Publishing decided this was a good book and a good fit for them. Secondarily, the long-term goal of the project is to turn the zine into a full book. So if you like that and like that idea and want to learn more about the ideas we're talking about here, please buy the zine over at microcosmpublishing.com and then follow me on social media at Mr. Fifth Round, MR, the number 5, THRUND. Follow the podcast, tell your friends about it. And let's get this information out there, man. I've had a great time. It's been a life-changing experience being a part of the developing comedy scene here at the Jersey Shore. And I want to just get that experience and teach other people what we learned here over the last 10 years. And hopefully whatever we did in 10 years, you can listen to and do in 6 years or 5 years. Or just get from A to B much faster and do what we did a little bit better, a little bit faster, a little more efficiently, and get to this great community we have now of stand-up shows and open mics and improvs and podcasts and poetry reading and stuff like that, and get there in less time than it took us. So again, my name is Angelo Gingerelli. The zine is Stand Up and Laugh, available now from microcosmpublishing.com. And this is the first episode of the Stand Up and Laugh podcast featuring my friends over Microcosm Publishing, Elly Blue and Joe Biel. Stand Up and Laugh. Build a Comedy Scene, Produce Your Own Shows, and Create Community by Angelo Gingerelli is available now on microcosmpublishing.com. If you're trying to make your way in the world of stand-up comedy, you can build your career while enlivening your local comedy community and mutually supporting your fellow humorists, and you can even have fun while doing it. Angelo Gingerelli shares his hard-won advice for anyone who wants to create a comedy scene from scratch in a smaller community, carve out their unique niche in a larger city full of professional funny people, or anywhere in between. Lots of good tips here for anyone organizing community events, from how to book venues, get publicity, and avoid drama. Also includes great arguments for starting or joining a comedy scene rather than thinking of yourself as a lone wolf, and solid wisdom for being an asset to an existing stand-up community. Stand Up and Laugh by Angelo Gingerelli is available now on microcosmpublishing.com. In the early 2010s, Adam Carolla had one of the most successful podcasts on the planet. The stand-up comic, host, actor, and filmmaker was an early adopter of the new medium and quickly established himself as one of the most successful podcasters in the industry. The show had enough fans that every few weeks he would answer questions from callers. Just having callers was a huge accomplishment for podcasts during this era. On one memorable episode, a guy called and said, "I'm a stand-up comedian and I've been banned from my local comedy club's monthly open mic night because I'm too edgy for the club's management." When Carolla probed deeper, it became apparent the caller was often belligerently drunk on stage and his material was offensive enough that audience members regularly left the show during his sets. Carolla asked the caller why he didn't just go to other open mics where his behavior or material wouldn't be an issue. The caller replied that this event was the only open mic in his town. At that point, Adam Carolla pretty much told the aspiring comic that he needed to either quit comedy or move to a place with more open mics, because if he could only get on stage once a month, there was no chance he could make any real progress as a performer. I have no idea what happened to that comic. For all I know, he may have moved to Los Angeles, got a Netflix special, and started selling out arenas all over the world. But Carolla was right. Doing stand-up away from major cities like New York, LA, Boston, or Chicago can be an incredibly daunting task for a unique set of reasons. In major markets, there are more than enough places to perform and hone the craft of stand-up comedy. There are nights in New York City and Los Angeles where it's nearly impossible to avoid venues with people performing. Dedicated performance spaces have shows 7 nights a week, and sometimes multiple shows per night. Alternative venues like bars, restaurants, comic book stores, public parks, record shops, and even laundromats have nights where somebody plugs a mic into a public address system and people perform. Some of these shows are great, some are not so great, but they all allow aspiring comics to try new material, meet other performers, see and be seen by people in the scene, compare notes with like-minded people, and get experience being on stage. Without the ability to get on stage often, almost no aspiring comic is talented enough to develop a voice and stage presence, refine material, and learn to deal with a crowd at a level that will allow them to really begin to master their chosen craft. Aspiring comics who live in areas without thriving arts and entertainment scenes can either pick a new dream, move to a city where the scene will support their growth as a performer, or develop their current location into an environment where they can flourish. This podcast will teach readers how to start a scene in their community that will offer open mics, showcases, book shows, and other opportunities to get necessary performance reps and actually make progress as a stand-up comic. About the author, also known as Who Is This Guy and How Can He Help Me? My name is Angelo Gingerelli, and I've been performing stand-up comedy consistently since 2013. I'm not famous, I'm not selling out comedy clubs, and I'm not deciding what model of Tesla to buy with my, quote, comedy money. I do a fair number of shows in New Jersey, have produced multiple successful and long-running comedy events, and have been lucky enough to be a small part of the growing arts and entertainment community in the rising city of Asbury Park. During this time, I've been a part of some very successful ventures that have created revenue for local businesses, and I've given a lot of people a platform to perform. I've also had a few failures that taught me what not to do. I'm sometimes called the, quote, Godfather of Asbury Park comedy, and multiple comics refer to me as their, quote, comedy dad. I'm not sure either description is totally accurate. Sure, I may have been one of the first people doing stand-up at the Jersey Shore, but to keep it real, when I started my first open mic, comics showed up who were already performing at other local venues. As in most cases where one person is given a lot of credit for starting something, there were actually a bunch of people doing similar things at the same time, and one or two emerge as the face or the dad of the scene. For example, in the early 90s, there were multiple bands, venues, studios, producers, and singers experimenting with what would eventually be called grunge. But Nirvana is given credit in our cultural consciousness for creating the genre. So while I can't take credit or blame, depending on who you ask, for the Jersey Shore's thriving comedy scene, I can confidently say I was a part of laying the foundation in the 2010s that supported the current state of shows, mics, sketch, improv, podcast, etc. happening in the 2020s. My quick comedy bio. I grew up at the Jersey Shore and was a pretty quiet kid. I always enjoyed funny movies, prank calls, and stand-up comedy on late-night TV or my parents' cassette tapes, but didn't really get into comedy until a little later. In the mid-90s, the alternative comedy scene that had been developing in cities and on college campuses finally found its way to the suburbs, and I was hooked. The State, the Jerky Boys, Def Comedy Jam, Conan O'Brien, Jim Carrey, Adam Sandler, Wes Anderson, Howard Stern, and TV shows featuring stand-up comics like Uptown Comedy Club and MTV's Half Hour Comedy Hour changed my perception of comedy, entertainment, and in some ways the world. As cable television expanded from a few mainstream networks to hundreds of niche channels, there became space for the avant-garde, experimental, and downright bizarre comedy that really appealed to me and my friends. Sure, Johnny Carson was great, and Rodney Dangerfield cassettes would still make us laugh, but this was different. This was a new era that spoke directly to us. A decade later, this paradigm shift continued with the development of the internet and widespread use of social media, where literally anybody could be a comedian. Platforms like YouTube, Instagram, and Spotify have allowed anyone with an email address and a dream to post content for the world to see without your traditional show business gatekeepers. In recent years, algorithms, sponsored content, and pay-to-play blogs have made the internet more like the traditional Hollywood model. But for the first few years, it actually was a wide-open playing field where anybody could gain attention and recognition. I got involved in internet comedy around 2009 when my mother passed away and I was cleaning out my childhood home. In the process of preparing the house for sale, I found a toy robot that I received for Christmas in the mid-'80s. I started taking silly pictures of myself hanging out with the robot like we were friends and posting them on Facebook. These photos eventually amassed a small following and led to the launch of my website, www.fifthroundmovement.com, which became my outlet for funny pictures, videos, writing, and interviews with stand-up comics from my area. I had tried stand-up in 2007 by going to open mics in New York City and not telling any of my friends or family about it. An easy feat in the era of MySpace and flip phones that would be much harder today. Over the next few years, a series of events that ranged from really good, like meeting my wife, to really bad, like my mother passing away, forced me to take a break from the open mic circuit in the city. I eventually moved to the Jersey Shore in 2012, which coincided with the arts and entertainment scene in Asbury Park exploding. In early 2013, I went to a comedy show at an independent art house movie theater. At the end of the show, the host announced she was leaving the area to pursue other opportunities and that this should be the last show. It had been a while since I had performed, and this opening seemed like a good opportunity to get back in the game in an area that was clearly on the rise. Later that week, I emailed the theater and scheduled a meeting with the owners where I detailed how I could continue live comedy shows in the venue. At this point, I still knew a lot of comics from North Jersey and New York, and I took over producing and promoting the monthly comedy show using these contacts. The show started off strong and continued to gain momentum, eventually regularly filling the theater to capacity and becoming one of the hottest tickets in town. The success of that monthly show led to opportunities like starting open mics, hosting various events, participating in festivals, and a lot of local media coverage. It also showed venues that comedy was a viable option to create revenue and in some ways got the ball rolling for the entire scene to develop. So here we are. The Jersey Shore has become a great place for comedy. Some weeks there are as many as 10 shows that showcase local comedic talent, from variety shows to improv. From traditional booked comedy shows to music comedy hybrids, there's never been a better time to be a performer in this part of New Jersey, and I'm just happy to be here. I love that I can go to multiple open mics a week without going to New York City to try new material. I like that there are book shows and bigger events almost every weekend where I can either get on stage in front of a real crowd or just go and be a fan of what other comics are doing. I love that there are dozens of podcasts, websites, newspapers, social media accounts, and web shows covering our scene. And to be totally honest, I feel incredibly lucky that I get to be involved in any of this. The Stand Up and Laugh audiobook / podcast. It interviews some of the best names in comedy. We're talking about Chris Gethard, Jersey's own, host of New Jersey's the World, host of the Chris Gethard Show, host of the Beautiful Anonymous podcast. We got Johnny Brennan from the Jerky Boys, a game changer in the 90s, sold millions of albums of prank calls. We got from Arizona, James Petrogallo and Jimmy Wichman, the host of both the Crime and Sports and the Small Town Murder podcast. From the world of heavy metal, we got Don Jamieson. He's been on MTV. He's been on VH1. He's on tour with literally every heavy metal hard rock band you ever heard of. From the Dirty South, we got Manny Garavito and Matthew Hahn. From Jersey again, we got John Paul Rome, one of the finest touring comics to ever come out of the Jersey Shore. From Cleveland, Ohio, we got Jim Tews, made a documentary about Cleveland's comedy scene a couple years ago and been killing it ever since. We got some of the Jersey Shore's finest comics, including Joe Borzada, Eric Hollerbeck, and Molly Sperduto, all coming at the game from different angles. From Instagram, we got Selena Kopic, the host and the voice behind the NYT Val's Instagram account. And from Comedy Fight Club, we got Matt Maron. The Stand Up and Laugh audiobook / podcast is available now wherever you listen to podcasts, and Stand Up and Laugh is available right now from microcosmpublishing.com. And now it's time for an interview segment of the Stand Up and Laugh podcast. We're going to start these interviews with the people that are responsible for publishing the zine that led to this podcast. From Microcosm Publishing, it's Joe Biel and Elly Blue. How are you guys doing today?
Good. Thanks for having us on.
Awesome.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. You guys do some really cool stuff in the publishing industry. I wanted to get to you guys and your personal histories, and then I want to talk about how I learned about the company, which I think is a pretty interesting story. And I was lucky enough to work with you guys this past year, and I think it's been a pretty good relationship for everybody involved. So maybe we'll just go alphabetical order. We'll go Joe Biel first. What's your professional background? How do you get into the publishing industry, and what led you to start Microcosm?
So, I have probably the most unlikely career path of anyone. So I grew up in punk rock, and I was involved in a do-it-yourself club where we would book bands, and, and it was totally like a transformative experience for me when, this being like 93, 94, and and I saw just all of this like really creative spirit come through, and people that, I just thought were so cool. And I just wanted it to be about something more than just the music. And so I don't remember this, but one of the older guys from that place, he swears that one day I declared that I was going to start the punk publishing company. And I did that, actually, somehow, unbelievably. And in between, I managed restaurants for a few years, and that was about it. I didn't really have any sort of educational background or professional background or much to speak of. It was really, when you're young, I feel like there's a certain power in your optimism and not knowing how difficult something will be, so you just do it.
Yeah, and that was 93, you said, but the company got off the ground in 96. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, so you started super young on this, and I think there's something to be said for that. I'm just jumping in, going at it as hard as I can. I'll figure it out as I go along. That's kind of that punk rock energy, right? That's kind of the same ethos that you took from the music to the publishing, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And I took it as to me, it was about the ethic and like the spirit of imperfection, and this idea that you didn't need to get anybody's permission to do what you were doing, and those things resonated so hard with me, and really nothing has changed except maybe I take them for granted now.
Yeah, it's really cool. That's become your life, man. I think it's phenomenal, man. You've made a career out of that. Elly, what's your background? How do you get involved, and where you're from and that kind of stuff?
So I'm actually from New Haven, Connecticut. So your accent is like balm to my soul, by the way.
Okay, I'll take it.
Here. And I I had a very different path towards Microcosm. I made zines when I was a teenager, and but when I thought in my 20s I was going to spend my career as a bicycle activist, and I did quite a lot of that. And just around the time I was sort of like remembering all the zines I made as a teen in my bedroom and was feeling nostalgia about that. And I was like, I want to get involved in that again. That was around the time I met Joe. And Joe kind of like pushed me further into making more zines. And then I ended up starting my own publishing company to focus on publishing feminist books about bicycling. And at some point it just got to be kind of like I couldn't grow anymore, just myself. And I ended up selling that company to Microcosm in exchange for this wonderful job that I have now.
5-6 years later?
Yeah, it's been 6 years now. And it's super fun. It's actually really fun to work on books that are about a wide range of topics.
You know, and there's something I want to touch on real quick. There's something I realized this year, kind of working with you guys, kind of some other projects. At some point, when you come from like Joe in the punk rock world or me in the backpack hip hop world, we're so into do it yourself. Like you're a single entity and I want to do my thing by myself. But at some point, there's something to working with other people and that's what lets you take that next step, right? Like I've been able to put out more zines and have different marketing and more people read this book than I possibly would with you guys than without you guys, right? So I think there's definitely an element of you got to pick the right partners and pick the right people to merge with and move on from there. Would you guys agree with that?
Totally. Yeah. And it's just lonely working by yourself after a while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Being that a lone wolf or that single entity can be tough. So like we talked about a minute ago, Microcosm gets off the ground in 96. What do you guys, it's kind of right at the beginning of the internet, a little before social media, a little before blogging, if I'm correct. What are the first couple of years like, Joe? How do you get the company rolling and what are the first couple of things you publish?
I love this part. And we revisit this kind of thing periodically between us because, you know, it's hard to remember anything 25 years ago. But, you know, from as best as I can remember, we was just me at that time. And, you know, I was like an at-risk kid. So I really thought about it in terms of like, what kind of resources do people like me need but not have any access to? And so I made these little ads on paper and I would run them in, you know, like some of the magazines I read, and I would send them out, and I would trade where I would promote other people's stuff in return for, you know, them promoting my stuff. And you know, that pretty quickly created, you know, you would get orders in the mail back then. So you would literally get like somebody mailing you cash wrapped in paper in an envelope with like a physical handwritten list of what they wanted to order. Right. And that, I mean, you know, and I feel like when I show people that stuff, that it just blows their mind that like somebody would do that. But to me, that just makes perfect sense. And, you know, and I mean, I feel like that was what DIY was in the 90s. But it was really fast where, you know, I feel like within 5 years, the internet wasn't just for nerds anymore. And then it was like people were pretty quickly like, you know, we were one of the first places where, you know, we had like an online catalog where you could just order our stuff, you know. And at first you would just have to use our website to then mail us cash or, you know, check. But then when PayPal was invented, that was like the real breakthrough because then you could just order on our website and that was that, you know.
Right. And people felt comfortable buying stuff online by that point. And, you know, the internet's often running and the game has changed, to use a cliche. Either from the late 90s or even right till 2021, what have been some of the biggest sellers or notable releases you guys have had that either you personally really like or feel attached to, or just have really opened some doors for the company?
So there was a couple. The first one was called Making Stuff and Doing Things. And that book, I mean, it was originally like a set of zines that we published in the 90s. And then it was, I mean, it's still, like it had another big moment on Tumblr last year or maybe the year before. And so, but it's like, it's just a book of like creative projects and it's more like a springboard to, you know, have just creative thinking and like think about ways to repurpose your environment. and to, have like utilitarian projects. And I mean, I feel like it's just so weirdly timeless. And that one, that was the first, that book kind of like set our agenda, where we were like, we are going to help people do things. Like, that is our function, and that wasn't entirely clear because, like, when you do stuff about like mental health or whatever prior to that, people were still pretty skittish about that then. They didn't really warm up to that until more recently.
And then our most recent bestseller is a book called A Brain, which is 100% about mental health and trauma recovery, a topic nobody would touch until, I guess, this book came out at exactly the right time. And we have just sold like,
it's like 130 some thousand and counting.
I know, and it sell more every year, which isn't normally how books go. Normally they sell a lot in their first year and then trickle up. But nope, this one just keeps growing and growing.
And I've read that book. I enjoyed it. I learned a lot from it. That's Dr. Faith Harper, correct?
Yeah,
yep.
Exactly.
So the previous book she wrote was called Unf Your Anger, correct? That's one in the series. And that's how I came to you guys. My wife gave me that book for Christmas at the end of 2019. I didn't have crazy anger issues, but it's something I probably learned from, right? I read it. I enjoyed it. I saw the Microcosm comic on the first page, and I was like, oh, this is a cool company. And I went down that rabbit hole, and that's what led me to sending you guys the query letter and the zine coming out. So that's shout out to the Unf Your Blank series, because that really helped me out getting to know you guys and getting to work together. I think it makes perfect sense. That's a bestseller because there's so much good info in there. And unfortunately, that mental trauma we all go through isn't going anywhere. So it's a market that's not going to fade anytime soon, unfortunately. As far as what kind of books are you guys looking for? If someone wanted to send a proposition over to you guys, what is the Microcosm model or the book you want to look for if someone wants to publish something with you?
It's got to change, or, it's got to be about the reader, so number one. So it's got to help the reader change their life and the world around them. So it's got to empower them fundamentally. So we don't do like exercise books or diet books, So it's got to be like how to reframe your thinking, or how to, like change your community, or like build the world you want to see. So, and the best ones of those are things that we have never thought of.
Like, we're working with an author right now on a book about feminist juggalos, which I'm just like so into this.
Yeah. I will absolutely read that when it comes out.
Oh, it's going to be amazing.
We did like a whole bunch of different things. Like, we're doing one about like the history of like booty bass, and we're doing another one about like Miami hip hop, and and so I think that kind of stuff, even if it's like arguably a history book, it's kind of like, it's a way that you can see the world not be so vanilla,
And like a way for readers to see themselves in the pages also. Like, so much of publishing, like statistically, the people who buy the most books are like young Black women, but publishing is 100%, the publishing industry is almost 100% focused on trying to capture the attention of middle-aged white people. And there's just so many readers out there who are like looking to see themselves. Yeah. And can't in most of the books out there. So that's something we really want to change. And so,
yeah, we do nonfiction kind of for that reason, partly because fiction is just super saturated, and partly just because, it's like, it's harder to connect a fiction title to its audience because it's so saturated. And also just because, people that's a little bit more their darling than something they're really willing to workshop, and whereas, so like when we can do our best, it's when somebody meets us in the creative partnership, where they see us as like bringing something to the table beyond distribution and, money.
And just from, I can see from first-hand experience, you guys are great with that with my zine, and you hooked me up with Molly Seamus, who did the editing, was a great partner in that, and it's been a really cool process working with you guys, so I could stand up and attest for that. What advice do you guys have for authors or publishers that want to get in the game? What advice would you give to someone that's, say, right out of college, right out of high school, and wants to kind of follow in your footsteps?
There's a weird thing about publishing where people assume that because they've read a few books that they understand the fundamentals, which is kind of like living in a house with plumbing and assuming that you know how to be a plumber, you know? And so you want to like take it 10 steps back and take it apart, put it back together, look at it, you know, and then fundamentally understand, first of all, what's out there, what is successful, why it's successful, and then, you know, find your own self and interests in that, you know? So like the most important thing is like to go to 2 bookstores, because that'll show you what is new, what is hot, what is like, and you know, and then use your own critical thinking brain to be like, what of this is actually interesting to me, you know? And then look at like what of that is like placed in the front of the store, and why is it, you know, why is it happening? And
know that like anyone whose area of expertise is building a community is going to be really great for their work. So we knew, and it's been true. Like you're an amazing promoter of the zine, and it's had a lot of orders coming in all the time. We're still getting them, and it's been really cool to see like your community is showing up for you in that way, as well as other people who are interested.
And then, you know, the advantage of a title like that is like when the world reopens a bit more, then stores that are getting, you know, somebody comes in and they ask for help with that, then when they look it up, they will find your zine as the available title, and then they'll be like, oh, this totally helps out with the problem we have. And, you know, and so that's part of the deal is, you know, if you build it, they will come. You will probably build more comedy scenes by like making that available than people even knowing that they wanted to do that.
Agreed. And it's one of the goals, man. Getting it out there and letting people do some of the stuff on their own and giving them a manual to get that ball rolling wherever they live. So I really appreciate you guys giving me that platform. Stand Up and Laugh. Build a comedy scene, produce your own shows, and create community by Angelo Gingerelli is available now on microcosmpublishing.com. If you're trying to make your way in the world of stand-up comedy, you can build your career while enlivening your local comedy community and mutually supporting your fellow humorists, and you can even have fun while doing it. Angelo Gingerelli shares his hard-won advice for anyone who wants to create a comedy scene from scratch in a smaller community, carve out their unique niche in a larger city full of professional funny people, or anywhere in between. Lots of good tips here for anyone organizing community events, from how to book venues, get publicity, and avoid drama. Also includes great arguments for starting or joining a comedy scene rather than thinking of yourself as a lone wolf, and solid wisdom for being an asset to an existing stand-up community. Stand Up and Laugh by Angelo Gingerelli is available now on microcosmpublishing.com.